This presentation is brought to you by the International Sportsmen's Exposition, the West's largest fishing, hunting, camping, and outdoor sports show, celebrating its 31st season. And by Ultimate Bass Radio with Kent Brown, Sports 1140 AM KHTK.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the International Sportsmen's Expo. This is day 3 of our 4-day annual stop here in San Mateo. For those of you gathered around the tank, and for those of you that are in on the rainy day, you're in for a real treat. We've got a great lineup here at the Ultimate Bass Aquarium Demonstration Tank. My name is Kent Brown. I'm the host of Ultimate Bass every Saturday morning on KHTK Radio, 1140 a.m. On every morning Saturday at 5 o'clock. If it's a little bit too early for you guys, you can check it out on westernbass.com on their radio pages. Download it to your iPod. We got the only all bass fishing radio show out there. Mike, just go me up. Hey, tell you a little bit about our aquarium tank. This tank's a 3,500-gallon aquarium demonstration tank. We bring it in empty. Good time the tank is. I got to tell you, vertical jump isn't very good. And you saw him on television this year. Mike and I fished for the first time together in 1983, if any of you are wondering how long we've known each other. It's been a while. Mike Reynolds is really considered one of the top fishermen to ever come out of the West Coast. He will be competing at Lake Toho in Florida this February at the Bassmasters Classic. He won last year on the BASS Tour. You guys saw him on the Bassmasters TV show. You saw him win the Clark Hill Reservoir tournament back there. It looked a lot like Meteorville, a little bit like Lake Shasta. And last minute heroic, Mike caught the last minute fish to win $100,000 to BASS Clark Hill tournament. In the West, there's not much Mike hasn't done. He's been a Dollar Cup champion, a West Coast Bass Classic champion. He's won on just about every circuit out there, and really considered one of the top touring pros across the country. Proud to call him a friend of mine. He's sponsored by Dodge Trucks. You guys will see him running around in a new Dodge Cross Cab truck. From Champion Boats, please welcome BASS champion and Bassmaster Classic qualifier 5 times. Right, 5 times? And his best finish in the Bassmasters Classic was 4th. And he's going to better that in February from the depths of California, one of our West Side boys, Mike Reynolds.
Thanks a lot, Kent. Great. I don't know how to follow that introduction. That's pretty sweet. Being a pro from California, everybody hear me okay? Coming in loud and clear? Good? Okay. Being a pro from California and going back east like that is, it's every bass fisherman's dream. It's such a neat experience for a guy like me that's grew up on the West Coast and fished the Delta and the Clear Lakes and all that, and Shastas, to get to actually go back there and learn all these new bodies of water and get to travel from lake to lake and see all these great fishermen and great fisheries, and it's just a dream come true. And for me to be from the West and to go back there and do good, it's great. And the support I get from all the Western anglers, I mean, that's one of the main things that gives me energy to go back there and just compete and kick those guys' butt. But anyway, I got lucky last year, and I won a tournament, a Bassmasters Tour event in Augusta, Georgia on Clark's Hill Reservoir. And, most people will get up here on the tank and pretty much go over a lot of stuff on fishing and everything. I just kind of I'm going to do a little of that, but I want to kind of tell my story about Clark's Hill. Okay, I want to kind of let everybody know, what it's like to win a Bassmaster Tour event and what it took, for me to get there and for me to get it done, and kind of go through each day. And what's neat about the Clark's Hill Reservoir tournament is it was the first time that BASS had been there in like 20 years. So kind of everybody went in there with the fair. Let's say, nobody really knew the lake. It was a different lake, so there wasn't any locals and there wasn't any local knowledge, so to say. No, we hadn't been there in a long time. So one of the things I want to talk about today is how to dissect a new lake. If you're going to a new body of water, what are some of the things that help me figure these bass out, on a new body of water? And Clark's Hill is a perfect example. And, I was lucky enough to win the thing, and, the prestige that goes with winning that is unbelievable. I mean, actually, after the tournament was over, guys like Rick Clunn and Denny Brower, guys that have been my idols forever, actually came up and congratulated me. And, it's just a great feeling to win, on that level. It really is. So what I'm going to do, we're going to kind of talk about the Clark's Hill tournament, how to dissect a new lake, do a little fishing maybe in the tank, but mainly I want to talk about, my trials and life on the Bassmaster Tour and the Clarks Hill Tournament. And the Clarks Hill Tournament started out, like I say, nobody had any clue what was going on there. So I went out, and then, we're going to use Clarks Hill just as a lake like any other lake. If you're going to a new lake, say you've never been to Lake Shasta or you've never been to Lake Don Pedro, this theory works on all different lakes. And there's a whole lot of things to it. There's a lot of little variables. I mean, when I say little variables, and when I get up here, I'll lose my train of thought a lot of times because I'll get into something and then I'll remember there's a real important key aspect of something that I want to tell you, and I'll get off the subject and go on to that. But there's a lot of little variables. But mainly when you get to a new lake, the first thing you want to do is you've got to figure out, okay, what time of the year is it? Okay, what's the water temperature? What kind of structure's in the lake? What kind of bait fish do the fish have in this particular body of water? And you need a good map of the lake, obviously, a good map, and seasonal pattern plays a huge part in it. But we got to Clarks Hill and it was 30 degrees and 25-mile-an-hour winds on the first day of practice. Okay, so I couldn't do much on the first couple of days of practice, and I really never caught maybe 2 or 3 keeper bass my first couple of days of practice. One of them on a crankbait, a couple of them on a jig. The lake had a lot to offer, though. It had dirty water, it had clear water, it had deep grass, shallow grass, had a lot of laid down trees. Had a really big dirty water river coming into it, and a major main lake, main body. So you had all the fishermen. Being a fisherman, I like dirty water. I like shallow water. I'm a shallow water power fisherman. But, everybody has their own ways of catching bass. And like I said before, I'm going to get off the subject on certain things. But it's kind of funny to me in a tournament, everybody will go out. Everybody comes back in to weigh in. And everybody's caught fish. Everybody's got bass in their live well. And everybody thinks they got the best lure or the only lure that will catch them. But everybody's throwing something a little different. So fishing your strengths is real important. You can't force the fish to bite what you like to fish, but you'll notice in these tournaments, guys always kind of stick to their strengths. And when you get a lake like Clarks Hill, again, it's got everything to offer. So guys were doing, the reason I'm going here is like Ike Canelli, he was in second place. He was cranking deep crankbaits. Jimmy Mize, he was throwing a Carolina rig in shallow, clear water. Guy Aker was up in some dirty water flipping. I was up in some dirty water flipping. So there's a lot of different scenarios. Now, what I did on the third day of practice, I said, okay, I'm not having much luck in the clear water. I kind of made my way up the lake. Halfway, I started to see the water change. And, I grew up on the California Delta, and flipping and pitching is my, that's my forte. When it's a flipping and pitching bite, I'm in pretty good shape. So I find myself sometimes in these tournaments not going to my strengths when I really should. And anyway, when you got guys like Tommy Biffle and Denny Brower, guys that throw jigs all the time, and you look at the records, you need to fish your strengths is what I'm saying. So anyway, the third day of practice, I ran all the way up the river. I looked at the map, ran all the way up the river. There was it was a real long, narrow river with dirty water, and there was 45-degree mud water blowing down this river. There was one major pocket on this river that went up and fingered off this river, had a big bay with 2 creeks running into the back of it. And when you looked at the map, it was the perfect spot, okay? I mean, usually you can look at a map and you can see a lot of lakes with a lot of perfect spots, but this, you can just look at this spot and know that if you hit it right, it had the potential to hold an up bass to win a tournament. It was a big area, it had 2 creeks, and again, the key to me was this water was blowing down the river at 45 degrees, but in this backwater, the water was up to 50, 52 degrees. So I went in there the third day of practice. We get 3 days. I go in there, and I proceed to catch just a couple of fish. And I know, like I say, everybody in the tournament probably looked at this area, because if you looked at the map, it just stood out at you. But what happened was the first 2 days of practice were so cold and windy, in my opinion, I think guys went up in there in those first 2 days of practice and didn't do any good. By the time the third day rolled around, the water started warming up, and that's what kind of made these fish start biting. I did not knock them dead in there on that third day of practice, but I caught 3 or 4 keepers. And when I'm practicing, I don't like to catch a lot of fish, just like everybody else, but I'm not the kind of guy that will actually throw a lure out and get a bite and shake the fish off. I'll set the hook to see what size fish it is, and then I'll move to the next spot. And what this cove had to offer, like I said, is a double creek channel. In each one of the creek channels, it had some rock, it had some secondary points, and it had a flat in between the 2 creeks. And I actually found the fish on the flat between the 2 creeks in practice. And that was kind of what, again, when you're going to a new lake, you have to leave your, open-mindedness. Very, very important. When I go to a new lake like this, again, I'm skipping off the subject, but I'm going to get back to it. When I go to a new lake, like, say, Clarks Hill, for instance, I will have 7 or 8 different rod combinations set up. Again, and I will let the time of the year, the water color, all these little variables is what makes me decide what I'm going to do. So the water temperature is 52 degrees. What's the perfect lure, for the perfect presentation for 52 to 55 degree water and with a little stain to it? And in my opinion, there's probably 2 or 3. Of course, a jig and pig. Number 1 bait, a jig. When to use a jig. And I'm getting off the whole beaten subject again, but this is good stuff, and I'm thinking about it. A jig is a fantastic bait from, say, 48 degree water temperature to 58 degree water temperature. That's a perfect jig bite. Spinner bait, another good cold water bait. However, a spinner bait can be used in many versatile different ways, but it's an excellent 52 degree water bait with some stain in the water. And then, of course, a crankbait also, a shallow running crankbait. And when you're back east, I've noticed back east, crankbaits really play a major part in tournaments back there. A lot of guys do really good on crankbaits, and they just throw them in the east a little more than we do. I think a lot of it has to do with the dirtier water and the shallower lakes. They're really nice cranking. So anyway, those are the 3 things that, with a 48 to 58 degree water temperature swing, those 3 baits, a crankbait, a jig, and a spinner bait, and especially the spinner bait. What's nice about the spinner bait is you cover a lot of water with it. Anyway, back to the story, okay, because I don't want to drag it on too long, but it's really, again, winning a Bassmaster Tour event is a dream for every fisherman, and I just kind of want to let you guys feel what I felt. So anyway, okay, the first day of the tournament, we blast off. It's warming up a little bit. I run all the way. This is probably a 45-minute boat drive all the way up the river. I pull into my area, really not knowing, because practice had been absolutely terrible for everybody just because of the conditions. We had ice storms and rain, so nobody really knew what to expect. And I went in there, and I had a shallow running crankbait on, a white chartreuse shallow running crankbait, and that's what I decided to start with. And when I'm throwing a crankbait, again, off the thing, but when I'm throwing my crankbaits, I'll always throw crankbaits on a fiberglass rod. Okay, that's important. I got one right here, nice St. Croix fiberglass rod. And the reason being, whenever I'm throwing treble hooks on any rod, I want some bend. Come on, I don't want a real stiff rod. Okay. What you want to do is you want to let the treble hooks do the job they're designed to do. You got 2 treble hooks on that thing, and with this fiberglass rod, you hook a fish on that, and it allows it, it's got a lot of give to it. And you don't, a spinnerbait has 1 hook, a jig has 1 hook, but a crankbait or a jerkbait has treble hooks. So you don't want a real stiff rod when you're throwing a crankbait. So I went in there with a 7-foot St. Croix, shallow running crankbait. This is a little deeper one here. We'll talk about this one a little later. But I went in there, and I caught a limit for, I think it was 11.5 pounds the first day, which when I caught these fish, I thought, that's fantastic. And every one of these fish came off this sandy flat between the 2 creek channels. And what was nice is I caught my limit pretty early, okay? So I had 11 pounds. I thought that was going to be really good. I mean, I thought that was going to be in the top 20, 25. I ended up being like 35th or something. I was still happy with that. But what it allowed me to do by catching that limit early is it allowed me to dissect this whole bay, this whole creek channel. I was able to go through slowly, and I was catching them on a crankbait that first day, so I never put the crankbait down unless I come up to a laid down log or whatever it might be. But I'd already had my limit, and I really didn't, I was the only, well, that's another thing we need to talk about. I was the only boat in the area but one other boat, and that was Denny Brower. So when you see Denny Brower in there, you're probably in a pretty good spot. But what it allowed me to do, so I crankbaited this whole bay. It actually took the whole day to go all the way around this bay. And this is really important for you guys to remember. When you find some fish, dissect the area you're in. Find any little oddity, any little structure, any little secondary point, anything that can hold the bass. So the next day when you go in there, you already got an idea in your head about this whole area. Now, if you don't catch your limit real fast, you're probably going to be stuck to your one area where you're catching your fish, and you're not going to be able to learn little intricacies about the area you're fishing. So by catching that early limit on crankbaits that first day, I learned this whole cove, and I learned what was going on in the cove. I learned the deep spots, the shallow spots, where there was a laying down log, where there's a pine tree down in 5 foot of water, just little things like that. And and you make a photo imprint in your mind so you know the next day when you come in. Okay, so day one's over. I'm in 30-something place, feeling really good about it because there's 170 of the best fishermen in the world, and 30th place is not too bad after the first day because you still got a chance to go do some good. Anyway, the second day I go in there figuring, okay, I've got my crankbait. I'm going to be able to go in there and really do some good. I go in there with the crankbait, and after, say, an hour and a half of fishing, I've got nothing. So here we go. Now, open-mindedness. You have to keep an open mind. So instead of sticking with that crankbait and sticking with this flat that I was fishing, because I grinded this flat for about 2 hours and not a bite on the crankbait. So I picked up a spinnerbait and I went you think to yourself, where have these fish moved? You need to follow these fish. You need to think about what these fish are doing. And the water was warming up, okay? So the fish, when the water's warming up, normally the farther back in the cove you go, the water's going to be a little bit warmer, and it just depends what kind of rainstorm you've had or what's running in the creek. But what I did is I kind of worked my way back in with a spinnerbait, and I hit one stretch of bank, say about 3.5 hours into the tournament, where I whacked them pretty good. I caught, I think, 13.5 pounds, maybe in 45 minutes to an hour, again, on spinnerbaits. So I haven't even scratched the surface on, dissecting these laying down logs and stuff. So then I started flipping some laying down logs, and I ended up catching one really nice fish on a Reaction Innovations tube on a laying down log, and this was close to the end of the day. So I really thought, the next day if I went in there with that spinnerbait, so again, I weighed 13 pounds. This moved me into, after the second day, this moved me into 6th place. So it just goes to show you how tough the fishing was. With the 13-pound bag, I got into that top 12, and you have to make the top 12 in Bassmasters to make the cut. So there we go. I make the cut. I get into that last top 12. I go in there last day thinking, I've kind of got these fish figured out. I'm going to be able to really do some good with this spinnerbait in the back of these two pockets. I really thought the fish were going to be in there. So I go in there that third day, and nothing happens on a spinnerbait. And then I go to the crankbait, and nothing happens on a crankbait. So again, open-mindedness. I didn't panic. I didn't stick with it. So I went ahead and I switched over to I went to the tube. I went to a Reactions Innovation black and blue tube. Again, the water was dirty. This would be on a flipping stick, an 8-foot St. Croix flipping stick with 25-pound test string. That's what I throw. And I started just slowing down and dissecting these logs, okay, these laying down trees. I mean dissecting them. And now, you ask yourself, why weren't you doing this the first 2 days? Because then I proceeded to catch 4 fish that weighed 16 pounds. One of them was 7 pounds. And I'm thinking, if I'd have been doing this all 3 days, I'd have killed them. And I only weighed 4 fish that third day, but they were big ones. I had a 7-pounders and some other. And these were all on tubes doing what I love to do, and that was flipping. So I come in on that third day, I weigh those fish, and it moves me into 2nd place. And the guy ahead of me was Mike Iaconelli, one of the best fishermen in the country, no doubt. And, I'm within grasp now of my dream. Okay, I'm in 2nd place going into the last day. I've got an area, and I just figured out how to catch the big fish. I'm going in there on the last day with nothing but confidence. I mean, I really felt like I could go in there and flip these logs and catch some more big fish. And, I figured I was behind Iaconelli by 6 ounces. I figured if I weighed 15 pounds that day, I'd win. I mean, that's honestly what I was going out there shooting for, 15 pounds. Anyway, I went in there. I flipped, in the first 2 hours with the camera boat on me, I flipped every log in there with a tube and never got a bite. And if any of you seen my TV show, you see me throwing a spinnerbait. And I never caught a fish on tube until that last one. We'll talk about that last one again. So anyway, here we go again. For the 4th day in a row, what I expected to have happen didn't. And that's what I want you to remember when you're fishing. Don't go out there with it. You have to have a game plan, but you have to have an open mind on all this stuff. Don't go out there with one thing on your mind. You got to be ready to be versatile because you got to survive the tournament before you win it. So you have to catch some fish. So anyway, I flip all my wood. I mean, these laying down logs are gorgeous. I just, the ones where I caught the 4-pounder and the 7-pounder, you pull up on there, you tell the cameraman, get the camera ready, this is where it's going to happen, and nothing. 2.5 hours, I have no fish on the last day of my chance to win $100,000 and win my first Bassmasters tournament. I don't panic. I stay calm. I pick up the spinnerbait. I run back through all the backs of my pockets. I've still got nothing. I pick up one 13.5-inch fish that gets me started. I just go down the bank. I'm fishing, and at this point, I've fished this place thoroughly, okay? So now what I'm doing is I'm throwing my spinnerbait, but I'm slow rolling it back to the boat, okay? I'm trying to find another piece of structure or something out off the bank that I might not have fished yet. I'm just looking for roaming fish. There was no fish on the cover in there. And sure enough, about every hour, if you've seen the TV show, you'd see me. I'd pick up a spinnerbait fish, and that's what actually got the tournament won for me. But I was catching these spinnerbait fish halfway off the bank. So what I'm saying is, instead of panicking and instead of pulling up my trolling motor and going to somewhere totally different, I just adapted a little bit in the situation that I was in the areas I was in, and I slow rolled that spinnerbait, and it wasn't pretty, but I got 4 fish in the boat on a spinnerbait that probably weighed 7.5 pounds. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you're out there fishing on a tough day, your goal is to catch 5 fish. Anybody here that fishes tournaments knows you want to get your limit in the boat. that does something for you anyway. You know you caught your limit. You kind of know you did your job. So with about 45 minutes to go, I had 4 fish in the live well. And if you've seen the show, you know what's about to happen next. I make a decision to leave the area. Not really the total area, but leave the areas I'd been fishing and go. I was going to put the trolling. I was going to put the big motor on until I seen a laying down log or something different. And real quick, something different. Bass pros, bass fishermen, anybody, when we're on a lake, we're looking for something a little different. Watercolor might be different. Drop-off might be different. There might be gray rock next to red rock. Just always remember, little subtleties like this make a huge difference. And this is totally off the story, but I mean, that's something to keep in mind. When you're pre-fishing for a tournament or something, focus on little things that are a little different. And we'll talk about baits and stuff in a second. Anyway, 45 minutes to go. Biggest tournament of my life. I mean, I tell the camera, here we go. We got 4 fish. We got 1 to go. I'm going to run where I haven't fished before. And I take off running. I'm coming out of my cove, and I look over to the left, and I see just some grass on the bank that looks like it's running in the water. Something totally different than I'd ever seen. It was just different. I said, that's it. I'm pulling in there. Let's see what happens. It was beautiful. It had some laid down logs. It's too bad I didn't find it before because I really think it probably held some fish. I'm working down the bank, and I look at the camera, and I say, 1 bite could make the difference. Not knowing and honestly thinking with the 4 fish that I had in the boat that I really did not have a chance to win this tournament. You know, because 8 pounds with Ike and Ellie right behind you and a bunch of other good fishermen there, you don't expect to win a tournament when you've got a light bag like that. Anyway, I make the right decision. I pull a tube out and I get, honest to God, blind ass lucky. You know, I threw my tube in, shook it on the log, and actually was reeling it in, and a 12.5-inch bass ate the tube as I was reeling it in. Okay? Miracles do happen. That 1-pound bass, I won the tournament by 6 ounces. That 1-pound bass with 45 minutes to go changed my bass fishing career, changed my life, put me on the map, and it's a fish I'll never forget. It's the biggest little fish I've ever caught. Sure enough, I come to the weigh-in, and, you know, kaboom, I win $100,000. But the moral of the story is I wasn't scared to adapt, and I changed, you know, as we were going. And, you know, to win a Bassmasters event like that back east was... it's something I hope every bass fisherman gets to experience. I mean, you know, there's a few guys on the West Coast that have done it, like Skeet and Robert Lee, and I'd never came close before. And to win one, it gave me the respect of my peers, and it put me on the map. So that's my story about Clarks Hill, and you know, being a West Coast guy and taking it back there and showing the East Coast fishermen that we can fish with them, and we're good fishermen. And you know, I've been told by some of the best fishermen that, you know, the Western guys actually are way more versatile than those guys on the East Coast, and we just have so many different scenarios out here compared to what they have. Really, when you go back east, you're looking at shallow water lakes with dirty water. You can find that in just about every lake you go into. So, you know, that's why spinner baits and jigs and tubes and crankbaits are such a key factor back there. We're out here on the West Coast, like a lot of these fish in the tank, we're fishing for spotted bass. When we run into spotted bass on the East Coast, they're a lot bigger than the spotted bass on the West Coast. At least that's what I've found out. It's a whole different breed of fish. But that's my story on Clarks Hill, and you know, I'm proud of it, and I hope you got to see it on TV. It was a lot of fun. Okay, now let's talk about some fishing. Let's try and give you guys a few tips and some stuff that can help you out. You know, I'm an old-time Delta fisherman. So is anybody here fish the Delta very much? Is there some Delta fishermen? We got a few Delta fishermen. I see one down there that's been fishing the Delta for a long time. By the way, after I'm done here, we're going to have a round table with me and Dee Thomas and Dave Rush and Skeet Reese and I believe Robert Lee. And if you really want to learn about the Delta, you don't want to leave, so stick around. That's going to be probably the highlight of the whole show, to have Dee here and the guys to pick their brain on the Delta. But I've been known to do okay in the Delta, and usually when we come here, we talk a little bit about the Delta. My key to fishing the Delta in the spring, this time of the year, is, you know, you have to stay with the flats. Okay, when I say the flats, I'm talking about flooded islands and stuff. You need to key on Big Break, Sherman, you know, things like that. The best advice I can give you is, on the Delta, there's weeds everywhere. You know, we all know about the Delta weeds. But when the tide will come up at the Delta, it'll leave a trough behind the weeds. And if you fish the Delta, you know what I'm talking about. On a high tide, behind the weeds, you'll have a little trough. sometimes the trough on a flat could be 20 feet wide. You just never know, but there's always a little clear spot behind those weeds. And coming up here in the next couple of months, these bass are going to be on a high tide. They're going to really be thick up behind those weeds. So when you're on a flat like Frank's track or something, that tide goes way down, you can see all those weeds. But when that tide comes up 4 or 5 feet, that gives all those fish, I call it like a fish aquarium, a lot of room back behind the weeds for these fish to get back in there. And that's honestly the best for the next, honestly, for the next couple, 3 months, I wouldn't leave Frank's Track, Big Break, Mildred, Sherman. I'd stay in these kind of key places. And great baits to use in there, like a Texas rig worm, a jig and peg, a spinner bait, a crankbait. You just have to vary it up and figure out what exactly the fish want. A lot of it has to do with watercolor. There's a lot. Actually, there's tons of variables. Another major variable that people don't realize how important it is line size. Okay, line size in any situation can be, it makes your lure, it gives you more action. Lighter line gives you more action on your lure. It makes your bait sink faster. Of course, if you're in heavy cover, you can't get away with that. So look, again, back to little variables. Line size is another thing that's very, very, very important. How clear is the water you're fishing? If the water's real clear, you got to use a lighter line. How thick are the weeds? And another thing about the Delta, and it's really working back east, is this. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's this penetrator weight. Okay, it's a real heavy flipping weight, 3/4 ounce to 1 1/4 ounce. And what these guys are doing with it is they're finding these real thick, heavy mats. And in the Delta, you have hyacinths, you have matted up weeds. It's a really heck of a good way to be fishing. It's something you ought to look into. You need an 8-foot flipping stick. Again, this is a heavy-duty 8-foot St. Croix flipping stick. I've got on it right now a little 5/8 Denny Brower rattleback jig with a brown piece of pork or pork chunk on it. But that's a good Delta bait right there. But that's actually a good all-around bait no matter where you go. That's a sweet little jig. But when I say, again, we've got all different level fishermen here, so we got to kind of go from the basics. But anybody that fishes the Delta knows a flipping stick is one of the most important things. But what a flipping stick is, it's a 7.5 or an 8-foot, very heavy, powerful rod. Okay, this is for heavy cover. What you're doing when you're fishing this is you're actually putting the lure or the bait that you're throwing right where you think the fish is sitting, right on his head, right. The presentation, this gives you a presentation that you can't get with a casting rod. Okay, the flipping stick, it's underhand like so, and when it drops in there nice and quiet. But it's pinpoint. You're actually putting the lure right in where you think the bass is living. And it's an underhand pendulum swing like that, and you get a real soft entry. Now what I'll do a lot of times, and I'll throw that in there, when you're working something in a lake or something and you're not, you're actually throwing out and working it all the way back to the boat. All you're doing with this 95% of the time is you see the piece of cover you want to fish, you flip it in there like so, let it fall in nice and easy, it sinks to the bottom, you shake it a couple times like that, maybe one more time. If nothing happens, get it out of there and go to the next spot. This allows you to stay in the strike zone a lot longer than if you're actually casting and working it. So, flipping and pitching is probably, you're going to hear a lot about it in about a half an hour at the round table, because the man that invented it's going to be there, D. Thomas. Basically, he started this technique. It used to be called tule dipping, and these guys had 10 and 12-foot poles. Now the maximum pole you can use is 8 foot. But it just allows you to get your lure right in there where the fish is, where he's at. Nice, soft cast, nice, easy presentation. And that's what it's all about. So that's what the flipping deal is. But this is, back to the Delta, this, if you had one of these, you could fish the Delta 12 months out of the year, and this is all you would need, honestly. Now, there's a lot of different scenarios, but if you're a Delta fisherman or want to learn a Delta, the first thing you have to do is get you a good, solid flipping stick and start practicing. And when I say practicing, what happens up above the water is the first part of it. You got to learn how to, underhand cast and all that stuff. But then once your bait goes into the water, it all starts. Then you got to learn, what the feel is, And when I'm fishing a jig, and this is not only on a flipping stick, but I like to almost loose line it. When I shake it, I'm not swimming the bait. I'm actually shaking it right on the bottom. So I call it a loose line shake. And man, a lot of my fish will come when you just shake that head just a little bit. Well, you'll pick up on it and there'll be something there. You might feel like a sponge or something. Set the hook. That's what it's all about. That's a bite. But Again, the flipping technique is a solid technique. It's a major tournament technique. All the guys back east use it, and it's not only for dirty water, but 95% of the time you're fishing it in dingy or dirty water. If you're in clear water or clear shallow water, you drop down a line size, you drop down your bait size. Again, there's so many variables to bass fishing. Everybody's going to get on this tank and tell you something different. Okay, my deal is what's got me where I'm at today, and this is the truth. And you know, I keep it basic and simple. I don't overanalyze everything. I go out there, I use seasonal patterns, I stay with my strengths, but I do not get carried away on all the dock talk and all the crap that you hear. Because again, like I said before, everybody's doing something different. You need to fish your strengths. You know, bass will hit anything, but you stick with your confidence baits. You know, you got to adapt to what the situation gives you. You got to kind of let the fish tell you what you need to be doing. I kind of lost my train of thought there a little bit, but anyway, flip and stick is a mean machine. It's something you have to have in your arsenal. And again, at the round table, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about the Delta and stuff. So I'm going to kind of get away from the Delta a little bit. Now, being on tour, I get to hang out with guys like Kevin Van Dam and Rick Clunn, and when you're standing away in line with these guys, it's pretty awesome. But the reason I brought up Kevin Van Dam is I fished next to this guy. I can't call Kevin Van Dam a friend of mine, but I've talked to him many times, and he is one hell of a nice, straight-up guy. But I've watched this guy, what he does with a jerkbait. Now, this is going to be good advice, okay? You want to be, like when you go to a lake, okay, you go to a lake and you start dissecting the situation. If you're a tournament fisherman, if you can do something a little different, a little smarter than the next guy, and the reason Kevin Van Dam came up is because the way he fishes a jerkbait, I don't think there's anybody in this room that could keep up with him. I tried to, my arm about fell off. I mean, this guy, his edge is he fishes a jerkbait faster and more reactive than anybody else. I mean, nobody can fish a jerkbait as fast as this guy. This is just one example. I'm going to put it on here and try and just give you an idea what I'm talking about. But a good example of this little trick, and I got totally off of what I was going to talk about, but I want to go into this thing because I sat there right next to Kevin Van Dam at Lake Waukegan in Wisconsin and watched him do this and was absolutely in awe. And there's no way I can duplicate it in this tank. But what it does, it's just something a little different. These bass see lure after lure after lure after lure. So bring something different to the table, okay? Do something a little different. Something that's just that makes the bass react. And his thing is to throw the jerkbait two to three times faster than anybody else, and you can't pull the bait away from the fish. I've seen that. I watched this guy doing this, and I mean, he was catching fish like crazy, and he's jerking this jerkbait 100 miles an hour. And it's just like, perfect example. I'm sure some of you got a cat, okay? If you've got an old cat and you throw a plastic worm in front of it and it lands right in front of it, and it just sits there and looks at it. You throw it at a young cat and it goes crazy. But the old cat, if you throw your lure around the corner and you zip that thing past that old cat, boom, he'll snap at it. Bass does the same darn thing. I'm telling you, you can make these things bite by just doing something different. Anyway, the jerkbait thing. This is one of my favorite this is an old junker Smithwick jerkbait that'll still catch just as many fish as anybody else. And see, normal guys would take this jerkbait and you'd jerk it like so, and you get some fish to react on it. Now, again, in cold water, you would fish this thing really slow, just like I'm fishing it right there. Just let it sit, suspend, it does its thing. Get some chasers. It's a great way to locate bass. Kevin Van Dam, and again, this is not about Kevin Van Dam, this is about doing something a little different. He'll throw the jerkbait out, and I, honest to God, will tell you, he'll jerk it this fast. And that ain't even faster than that. Okay, and these fish, it's something a little different. So always try and do something a little different. Let's see if we can get one of these fish to look at it. He's probably in a little colder water fish or something, but he did this, and he just absolutely whipped everybody's butt in the last two tournaments of the year. He did it at Pittsburgh, and he did it at Lake Waukegan. And the moral of the story is, bring something different to the table. Okay, how about this? We come up to a lake, and let's say it's post-spawn, or no, let's say it's spawning time. The fish are spawning. Everybody's bed fishing, everybody's throwing Senkos, everybody's doing this, doing that, whatever they're doing. try and be one step ahead of what everybody else is doing. Okay, a good pro, just because there's a spinnerbait bite on right now and everybody's catching them on spinnerbaits, a good pro will tie a buzzbait on. Because if you can be one step ahead of what everybody else is doing, that's going to give you an edge, a big time edge. So everybody's catching them on spinnerbaits. I'll try a jig, because what will happen? A good little example right here. Let's say there's a real good spinnerbait bite on the Delta, okay, but the pressure is getting heavy. There's tournaments going on, and the pressure is getting heavy. All right, we're going to try a jig, because the spinnerbait and the jig really work at the same times of the years. So instead of fishing fast with a spinnerbait or a moving bait like that, if you switch to a jig, sometimes you can get a lot more bites that way. But the extreme on that is, if that spinnerbait bites on and you think, man, the water's cold and the spinnerbait's working, try a topwater bait. Try to be that one next step ahead. And I mean, every one of these subjects I'm talking about, there's so many little things that add up and make the differences. I mean, time on the water is the best way to get this, to learn this game. But that one step ahead of the rest of the crowd, that's what makes you maybe a little bit better of a fisherman. Say the fish are spawning, but there's a few post-spawn fish. You put a frog on, okay? You switch to a frog. Everybody's catching spawning fish, but you're catching the fish that are a little farther ahead. And what I've learned over the years is the fish that are a little bit farther ahead, if you're that next step ahead, they're the bigger fish, okay? The same thing in the spring. When the fish first move up, they're the bigger fish. Seems like the bigger fish are always the ones that, get you, or, that are just like a little bit of a head. I mean, you're not going to catch a little bitty bass on a buzzbait when it's cold water. And when I say buzzbait, I'm talking, heck, the water could be 55 degrees, and most guys would throw a buzzbait only, later in the year, and sometimes a buzzbait early in the year can be deadly. That's just one example. And again, let the conditions of the whole scenario dictate how fast you reel it, what size line you have, all these little things. Again, there's no way I could even begin to, scratch the surface on all the variables that are involved in all this stuff. My best advice to a guy that's trying to learn bass fishing is sign up as an amateur in these pro-am tournaments. There's no quicker way to learn than signing up as an amateur in a pro-am tournament. You're going to draw guys like D. Thomas, Robert Lee, Ish Monroe. There's guys, those are just the guys that come off the top of my head. Man, there's tons of great fishermen out here, and you can learn in one day what you can learn in a whole year. So that, for my advice, is the best way to learn. But yeah, that one step ahead thing, that's very important. Now, and then there's something different, that's important. Now, how do you choose a lure for what, you pull into a place in a lake, what makes you pick the best lure? When do you use a jerkbait? When do you use a jig? When do you use a Cinco, And it's funny, if you're in California, February, March is a spawn, or March and April is a spawn. If you go to Florida, January is a spawn. So again, seasonal patterns is really what kind of gets you going in the right direction. But just off the top of my head, like, how about a 4-inch finesse worm? When would that be necessary? Again, there's so many different variables. If you get into a lake that's got real clear water or something and it's later, that finesse worm's going to be critical, or drop shotting. But also, even in these big power fishing lakes, I watched Mike Iaconelli last year make 4 or 5 cuts by throwing light tackle with a little shaky head worm. And what he was doing is the same thing as I was telling you before. He would doing something a little different. Everybody else would be throwing jigs and spinnerbaits and crankbaits. He'd come through with 6-8 pound tests and finesse these fish up right behind where people are going. Again, doing something a little different. Okay, I brought some rods here, so I guess we should kind of go over them. I got a spider jig on here now. We got spotted bass in here. Again, I love fishing jigs. This is another type of jig, and a spider jig, Yamamoto trailer. But this is a 7-foot rod now. Okay, another thing I'd like to talk about. I used to fish a lot of short rods, 6.5 foot. I'll tell you what, as far as I'm concerned, you can get rid of all your short rods. Okay? Nothing under 6.5 foot for me anymore. The power of these 7 and 6.5 footers is the only way to go. You can't be dealing with these little short noodle rods, 6 foot, 6.5 foot. There's very few situations where a short rod might come in handy, such as skipping tubes under docks or something like that. But if you're buying a new rod, Go to the St. Croix booth in there, get you a reasonable $80, $100 rod, and go with the 7-foot or 6.5-foot rod. They're very versatile. I mean, I can throw a spinnerbait on this rod, I can throw a spider jig on this rod, I can throw a crankbait, I can do whatever I do. Again, it's nice to have the whole scenario, and the right way to do a crankbait or a jerkbait is on a fiberglass rod, but it's not like you can't throw one on a stiffer rod. They still get the job done. This is a spider jig. It's another one of my favorite little techniques, and it works great on the Clearwater lakes, but back east you don't see a whole lot of that. Smith Lake, there's been a few places, but this is another scenario. And again, the same thing I was telling you before. You'll want to throw that thing in there, and I honestly, I like to shake that thing on the bottom like so. Just shake, shake, shake. They should be looking at this. The spotted bass love this. But you can fish this bait down to 30 or 40 foot. So it's totally the flipping stick, you're talking shallow water, putting it right on the head. This you're actually throwing out to a secondary point or something, letting it sink to the bottom, and actually working it on the bottom back. But again, remember that shake, shake, shake. That's very important. Instead of like lifting it up off the bottom and hopping it, which there's times to do that too, but I love to shake this thing on the bottom like so. I love to keep it on the bottom and just keep in contact. And when you're shaking that thing on loose line, when a fish picks it up, he's not going to feel you. Okay, he's going to pick this thing up. He's not going to feel you, because if you're swimming it like so, you got a tight line. As soon as that fish hits it, he's going to feel you, and you still might catch him, but you might not. The perfect scenario is that loose line. Now, a lot of guys will take these jigs, and not this exact jig, but a lot of guys back east are swimming jigs. Okay, that's a real good technique. And what they'll do with that is actually almost work it like a spinnerbait and pump it through like so. And what you want a little bit more bigger of a trailer, a little bit more action, and you don't want a football head for that. But that's just giving you an idea how versatile a jig can be. I mean, there's so many different ways to fish these jigs, and this is a totally different. This is a spider jig. This has nothing compared to what that other thing is. This is a Clearwater bait, deep water, heavy, 5/8. You can get down really deep. Again, keep it simple. Keep it basic. Don't get carried away. Don't go out there thinking, oh God, I need this color, I need that color. Fish your strengths, and have a lot of desire. That's what it takes. To get where I'm at today, and it's 22 years of fishing bass tournaments, I still have that desire to go out there and catch that bass. It's a game for me. I love chasing that bass, and every scenario they put you in is a little different. Time on the water. That's the most important thing I can stress to you guys. Time on the water. Again, we're going to have a round table in about 15 minutes. I'm going to get out of here so we can start setting this stuff up. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be in the champion booth. I'll be in the St. Croix booth. I'll answer any questions anybody wants to ask. And you got anything? Because, again, I get up here and I start rambling on. And, I know a lot of people are here to learn about, fishing techniques and stuff. But I really wanted to kind of tell my story about the Clark's Hill deal and how important it was to me. So thanks for stopping by. Enjoy the rest of the show. Believe me, in 15 minutes we're going to start the round table. And, folks, you don't want to miss this. It's going to be great. A guy that's in the Hall of Fame is going to be here. That's D. Thomas. One of the best Delta fishermen there ever was. One of the best fishermen, period, there ever was. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Folks, thanks a lot. Have a great show.